Taylor's numbers in like traditional dropback situations are like bottom 3, bottom 4 of qualified quarterbacks in the league. He's not good in that situation. Where he is good is when they pick up the pace, when they pick up the tempo. He's been fantastic in hurry up 2-minute situations. You know, we kind of had a nice laugh on the Wednesday pod talking about how they went those 2 back-to-back drives. That was like 23 plays for 78 yards. It took 14-18 off the clock, and they wound up with 0 points. It was a punt and a missed field goal, including an 11-play, 40-yard drive that didn't get past midfield.
Right.
So you've got that, and then he goes like 10 plays in 158 for 80 yards and a touchdown, or 90 yards and a touchdown. And that obviously leads to fans asking, we've addressed a shorter version of this before on the podcast of like, why don't they go hurry up? Why don't they go tempo? And the short answer is they don't want to hurry up. They want to bleed clock. They want to lead the NFL in time of possession, and they are accomplishing that goal. But Logan, is there, in your opinion, room to mix in some tempo to try to get more out of Heinicke without losing the things you are gaining by letting your defense rest, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are certain situations where you want to go tempo, or you can go tempo. And what I mean by that is, like, let's just take a situation, for example, where I think tempo would be advantageous. Let's say it's third and 2, or it's 2nd and 8. You get to 3rd and 2. I think in that situation, you're probably going to call a run or some type of play action pass, like hurry up there. You know what I mean? Like, get to the line of scrimmage quickly. Don't let the defense like kind of dig their cleats in, get set. It doesn't need to be 1,000 miles an hour, but that's a situation where I think a little bit of tempo is very advantageous. Situations where you're just looking for a little shift in your advantage, right? The defensive coordinator goes, oh man, they're hurrying up. Like, I can't sub. Like, let's just go my base call, which is cover 3. And then Taylor knows, everyone knows the front, kind of simplifies the whole deal. Then you can run the football for a first down, make that just a little bit easier for you, as opposed to kind of striving to get the perfect personnel, the perfect play call, the perfect motion on the field early on. Sometimes there is an advantage, I think, in like those high leverage situations to just be like, hey, this is the play we like. Like, I'm Scott on the sideline. I'm just going to call it. We can execute this with 10 seconds left, with 15 seconds left on the play clock, as opposed to 5. We don't need to give the defense all this opportunity to kind of say, oh, let's get the big guys on the field. Let's match in this coverage. Let's bring this pressure. Let's do this line stunt. So I think that's an opportunity. Obviously, end of half into game situations, I think is great. I think also when you're a little bit in a doldrum, I think a little bit of, and again, there are varying degrees of tempo. Like when I was with, like every system I was in, it's not just Kyle, every system I was in, you have like kind of your base tempo, which is you want to get the play executed with whatever the parameter is, 10 to 7 seconds left on the play clock. Then they have like their, Kyle called it Apache. That's like your kind of muddle huddle, hurry up. You have some code words, but you're still kind of huddling. You want to get the play executed in about 10 seconds, right? And then you have your 2-minute where there is no huddle. You're just on the ball. You're going as fast as you possibly can. You're sprinting around like a bunch of lunatics. There's no motion. So I think there's gradation to this, right? And I think a little bit of tempo in certain situations, I mentioned the third down situation, or like when you're in an offensive doldrum, can be advantageous. And it doesn't need to be. Everyone thinks it's an advantage for Taylor, right, to throw the football, and it is because defenses simplify. But it can be an advantage for the offensive line too, because it simplifies what they're doing from a blitz standpoint, from a coverage standpoint, and from a front standpoint. So and you might not even notice as a fan, like unless you're really monitoring the clock consistently, you might not even notice it, right? But I think kind of, working between first gear and third gear is a very, very valuable tool. And obviously when you want to go to fifth gear for like that 2-minute situation, there's also time for that as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you explained it that way, because that is where I also am. I think that a little bit of tempo can go a long way, and it's really about figuring out why Taylor likes tempo, right? Like, what is it about tempo that suits him? Is it the adrenaline rush? Because if so, like we're gonna have to chill out on that, because we can't go 2-minute all the time. So Taylor gets his adrenaline junkie fix. But if it's the simplified coverages, the simplified fronts, etc., we can dictate that pretty easily.
Yeah.
And this is where the Commanders' personnel being so versatile is incredibly advantageous. If you
Yeah.
want to go tempo, get Antonio Gibson in the game, knowing you can line him up as a wide receiver or in the backfield. Get Logan Thomas in the game, someone who's very comfortable splitting out into the slot. Get Curtis Samuel in the game, and you can line him up literally anywhere that is an eligible receiver position. Curtis Samuel can line up. And it gives you still a fair amount of your playbook. You're probably going to operate with some pared down version of it,
Right.
because you're not necessarily huddling.
Well, it depends on the
Um,
speed too. It depends on how
right,
fast you want to go, right? If you want to
right.
go even 10% faster, you can huddle. It's just about play caller being on it, quarterback being on it, and guys getting the line of scrimmage, right?
Right. But if you don't sub, the defense is not going to be able to sub. And
Right.
that's the biggest thing is it gets them tired. And like anyone who's I'm going to put on my strength and conditioning hat here for a second. Like when you're going super intense exercise, rest, super intense exercise, rest, which is a football play is a very intense 3 to 6 second exercise for everybody on the field. 10 seconds of rest is a long time.
Yeah.
So if you're giving the defense an extra 10 seconds of rest, they are so much fresher for that next snap versus, oh, I'm still catching my breath because we're snapping it with 15 on the play clock versus 5.
Yeah.
And so that like literally metaphysical or whatever word you want to use response that we're talking about here, when you're the aggressor, that is such an advantage for you. And, mentally to not be able to switch off, because even if you call something like that Apache speed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're talking that 15 to 12 or whatever kind of range on the play clock. If we get to the line of scrimmage as an offense quickly and the defense is like, oh crap, I got to be ready. Even if then Taylor backs off and does kind of the college football, let me look to the sideline situation, the defense doesn't really have a chance to relax.
Right.
And so they're going to wear down at a rate that's much faster while you still are elapsing the time on the clock in real time. John Allen doesn't care about that. He's sitting on the bench looking at the tablet, getting his water and his oxygen, and he's still getting the rest that allows him to stay on the field to the extent that he did against the Giants, where for the first time in his career, he missed only one play defensively. Like
Right.
that, because that is the trickle down, right? What you're trying to avoid is the defense being gassed at any point in the game. Add a higher necessity for subs along your defensive line where you want to keep Montez Sweat, John Allen, and Daron Payne on the field as much as possible when your defense is out there, which means keeping them off the field as much as possible throughout the entirety of the game. So it's finding the ways to mix in an ability to still accomplish that goal while getting the simplified coverages, the simplified fronts, and the advantageous matchups for you offensively. And I think mixing in a little bit of that like Apache level tempo can actually accomplish that quite well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think, you also got to say, like, how does this jive with the team's goals? And, like, I
Mm-hmm.
think you laid those out really well. So, one of the negative things about tempo, any kind of tempo, is that it can lead to a faster 3 and out. And ultimately, you're trying to avoid that. Like, that's the main goal of their whole offensive philosophy is stay on the field as long as possible. Don't leverage the defense. And so, traditionally, I think coaches say, "Oh, well, we got to go really slow," right? But there is an advantage to getting first downs, right? And if
Mm-hmm.
this helps you get multiple first downs, like I don't care even about scoring points, just kind of abiding by this offensive identity, just working to get first downs. And if the tempo allows you to do that in certain situations, I think that's where the juice would be worth the squeeze there. Now, do they feel comfortable with that? Do they want to leverage Taylor that way? How's the conditioning of the offensive line is a big one. Like
Mm-hmm.
when we first installed this like Apache tempo when I was with Kyle, one of the things that really stuck out to me was like it was awesome because the defense would get tired, but the big nasties would get tired too. And when they get tired, it gets sloppy. You've got some older players on the offensive line. Maybe they don't feel as comfortable kind of going at that pace. So these are all things that need to be considered when kind of making that assessment, when making that decision. But I think kind of to your point, there are degrees of this, right? And can you find advantages going by degrees? And I think if you're looking for inches, you're looking for edges. This would be something to exploit. But again, at this point, it's also important to note, like we talked about the RPO, we talked about the zone read, we talked about the tempo, how much they don't have a lot of time to put in new stuff. So if this isn't already in, that's probably not going to be in, if that makes sense. They're going to find something else, another kind of wrinkle that they feel more comfortable dealing in. But you're right, Craig. Like, you could do a myriad of things. You could get to the line of scrimmage quickly, kind of stand around, negate the subbing ability of the defense. All of those things are true. It's just about how much time do you have and where do you think the most value is. So we've identified three areas, or two specific areas so far, where there is an advantage. Like, if you were to implement those plays, there would be an advantage. But maybe the staff doesn't see those as advantages, right? They see them as more of a detriment because of the personnel, because of the philosophy, and they're going to go for a different edge, so to speak. So again, that's something always to consider in these conversations. Is we are looking at two elements, but football is multifactorial, right? It's very, very complicated and nuanced. And maybe they say we want to really embrace the screen game with Cosme and Wes Schweitzer in, as opposed to Trey and Larson, who are bigger, kind of slower players. Maybe that's the
Right.
direction they go. It could be a myriad of things, but they have to do something. These are two options. They might not deem these options as necessary, but there will be some type of innovation.
Yeah, and just like with the Taylor running discussion, we're talking about margins here. If they
Yeah,
do this one time per half and that's enough to keep Taylor in a rhythm and like get him going a little bit, that would be great. But also, like, Taylor's been good to start the last couple of games. I think it was the Atlanta game. He was 4 for 4 on the first drive. They blitz down the field and score a touchdown.
Scott's
So
been
it's not
great.
like, yeah, his first 15, like, Scott deserves a ton of credit. It's the ability to continue to adjust and like use that information as the game goes that I think has been a bit frustrating, but also defenses adjust and figure things out as well. Like, the other guys get paid too. And I think like the Giants game is a phenomenal example of that, as we talked about on the last podcast with some of what Wink Martindale did. It's like, oh yeah, he's great. He's great at what he does.
Yeah,
And there's a reason for that. So I think when you get in kind of those ruts, like you were talking about, that's a great time to potentially unleash a little bit of tempo to try to get Taylor going. But that also becomes a riskier proposition, right? If you're in a rut, you've probably been going 3 and out or 4 and out, and your defense might be getting a little bit tired, and going tempo might feel like the last thing that you want
right,
to do. Like, these things are hard. And I do think that's something that maybe we don't do a good enough job of explaining, because I don't think anyone particularly in media does, because then you just sound
right,
like you're an apologist. And
right.
it's like, oh, this is hard. Like, if all I did was say, hey, this is hard, my show from 3 to 6 every day would suck. Like, there's no point in doing it. Like, it's hard. What do I know? They know more than me. And there are times when I have no problem admitting, like, that's data that I would want to make a decision on. That,
Sure.
or
Yeah, yeah.
there's data I don't have that I would need to make that decision. And I will try my best to explain to the audience why I don't feel like I can accurately explain, or I don't have a high level of confidence with what my opinion is, because I just don't have enough of the information. With that said, these things are really hard, and there's the word multifactorial almost doesn't even cover it. It's like endlessly,
Yeah.
in terms of the factors. And some, like, there's things that we just can't, like, that we're probably not thinking about. And I think we've already hit on a couple of them, like you, or specifically you've hit on a couple of them, that a lot of us thinking about these things don't often. And the offensive line conditioning is something that clearly people don't think a lot about.
Right.
And even offensive line style, like, that's something we've talked about a little bit and kind of referenced at points this year. But, like, let's underline this here in our little self-scout. Part of the reason they've played the way they have is because Trey Turner's a big man who is
Yeah.
good at run blocking and not particularly excellent at pass blocking. He's certainly not very good at this stage in his career at getting out into space in the run game. So they've found a run game that works for not only their quarterback, not only their running back in Brian Robinson as he has come back to full health, but for big men who can run vertically, straight ahead, and crush whatever's in front of them,
Right.
but should not be asked to get out in space and hit little guys. Or just get out into space with any kind of time constraints, period, which is what happens on, nevertheless, a screenplay, but like a power play with a pulling guard. We're just,
Or even
that's
just like
not what
outside
this
zone.
is.
They ran
Yeah.
a lot of outside zone early, and they've gotten away from that, right? They kind of said, we're not great at this. And I think last year they were pretty good at it, and the offensive line composition was much, much different. So I think these are the types of decisions you're always negotiating. You're always scout scouting. You're always saying, what's the best opportunity for us, right? And, fans make assumptions and say, this thing, let's take the zone read, let's take tempo, will make this offense better. And that's true to a certain extent if the existing personnel can handle it. If this group is a physically capable of doing it and intellectually capable of doing it. So I think that's part of it. And also, like, does this offense translate well to kind of an Apache signaling approach? And I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, the offense is complicated. It's very nuanced, and I don't know if it does. But those are all things that need to be considered. And again, if you would have said, hey, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year, they're going to be like one of the most heavy duo running teams in the NFL, I'd have been like, that seems kind of silly given the weapons that they have, right? Given this whole thing. But they found a formula that fits what they do. And that's what coaching is. It's this constant evolution, getting away from the RPO, getting away a little bit from the zone read, getting away from the outside zone and saying, this is who we are. And I don't think anybody kind of could have predicted this. I don't even think I think they kind of stumbled into it, to be honest. But then it gives you all these other variations. This great play action pass games come off of it. And now my question is, what is the next thing? We've said these two things would help, but maybe there's something that they deem is better at helping. And I think that's the curious thing about these last 4 games is, what is that thing? What does this offense evolve to over the next 4 weeks?
Yeah, they certainly got some of the screen game involved again against the Giants. And, I was Mr. Hey, quit throwing screens to Terry McLaurin earlier in the year.
Yeah.
I was wrong on that one. He figured it out on Sunday and was super effective. And that 3rd and 15 that he got 14 and a half yards on. And you're like, wow, he's just so good with the ball in his hands, even if it doesn't look like, a lot of traditional screen runners.
But there's the advantage of Sam Cosmi at guard is
right.
He is out and very clearly clamped on the guy that's supposed to be tackling Terry. I was like, how did he get out there so fast? But that is him. And if you do that same play, which looks excellent with Sam Cosmi, if you do that with anybody else, not quite as good. You know what I mean? Not quite as good. So
because the margins on those kinds of things, and so often in the NFL, especially on things that involve blocking, so run plays, screens, etc., they're this much. You miss a guy by that much, he makes the tackle, or he gets a little bit more solid contact and slows down versus his fingertips hit the ball carrier and the ball carrier runs right through him. Those are the margins here. And so, a tenth of a second on your 40 as an O lineman, it's not like they're running 40 yards, but that difference in actual speed, let's call it a point in your speed on your Madden rating is a huge deal for those kinds of things. The last thing I'll say to kind of wrap up this section of the podcast with these 2 large topics that I think we've now given as thorough answers as exist on the internet for is that just because the team isn't doing something obvious doesn't mean it's actually the solution. And that's kind of, I think, the summary of all of this is they might run zone read in practice and it's terrible. So they're like, we're not going to run it. And instead of thinking oh my God, how could they not do this? It's the obvious answer. Sometimes the reframing in your mind should be, wow, there's probably a reason they're not doing that. It's so obvious. There's got to be a reason that they're not doing it. And I think that sometimes we can get a little over our skis and assuming that the obvious thing isn't happening because the coaches are stupid, as opposed to being like, no, if you think this is bad, you should see when we try the other thing. That's real bad.
Right.
Thanks for checking out this clip of Take Command. Or maybe it wasn't a clip. Maybe it was the whole thing. You can always get the whole thing. Let's change the graphic. Ready? Boom. Producing on the fly. Bang. Wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, right here on YouTube. You can also check us out not only at youtube.com/@CraigHoffman, but, Logan, the Odyssey Sports page is live soon. That's very exciting.
That'll be fun. I don't care where you subscribe, as long as you do subscribe to one of these platforms. That would be very helpful for us.
Yeah, do it. Or Logan's going to come to your house and he's going to be a sift blocker and knock you over.
Cut the legs out from under you, right?
Can't even do that on the field, but we can do it in real life.